No one expected Jasmine Crockett to walk into that courtroom. Not today. Not when the cameras were already rolling, and the headlines were pre-written in every reporter's mind: Judge Andrew H. Stone, champion of integrity. But headlines have a way of evaporating when the truth steps into the room. She didn't pause at the threshold. She didn't adjust her blazer or smooth her hair. She just walked, steady and certain, down the center aisle like she owned every inch of the polished floor. People whispered. Staffers shifted uncomfortably. Even the bailiff, who had seen 100 hearings, looked up, sensing something was about to rupture. Judge Stone sat behind the massive oak bench, the seal of the court looming above his head. His expression was the same practiced neutrality he wore in every proceeding, eyebrows slightly raised, lips set in a thin line. But his fingers tapped once against the gavel. Just once. Because he saw her. And he knew she wasn't here for ceremony. Congresswoman Crockett, he began, voice echoing slightly in the chamber, you were not scheduled to testify. I'm aware, Jasmine said evenly. Her tone wasn't defiant, but it wasn't deferential either. It was something far more dangerous, certain. A murmur rippled through the observers. Stone cleared his throat, trying to reassert control. You will have an opportunity to submit a written statement to the record, he continued, gesturing toward the clerk. She didn't move. I'm not here to submit a statement, Jasmine said. And then she placed a slim black folder on the table in front of her. I'm here to submit evidence. That was when the energy in the room shifted, like air being sucked out of a sealed chamber. The reporters leaned forward as if pulled by gravity. Stone's jaw tightened, barely, but enough for anyone really watching to see it. Evidence, he repeated, his voice catching on the edge of the word. Yes, she said, her hand resting lightly on the folder. Her eyes never left his. Evidence that this court, under your leadership, has concealed conflicts of interest, misrepresented financial disclosures, and failed the very people it claims to serve. A collective inhale filled the gallery, sharp and involuntary. Somewhere in the back, a young clerk looked down at his notes, as if refusing to meet her gaze would make this moment disappear. But there was no escaping it now. Judge Stone shifted in his chair. Those are serious accusations, he said, his voice lower. Jasmine tilted her head. No, she replied, her tone smooth as glass. They're facts. And in that single instant, everyone watching knew. This wasn't going to be another scripted hearing. This was about to be a reckoning. The courtroom didn't breathe. Every pair of eyes fixed on Jasmine's hand as she slowly unfastened the folder clasp. Judge Stone's gaze darted to the bailiff. An unspoken command hovering in the stale air, stop this. But no one moved. No one dared. Because the moment had a gravity all its own. Jasmine pulled out the first document, a photocopy of a signed financial disclosure form. She held it up so the gallery, the cameras, and Stone himself could see it. This, she said evenly, is your signed statement from 3 years ago, declaring you had no outside financial interests relevant to the Charterman versus Reynolds case. Stone didn't blink. Didn't move. But the smallest muscle along his cheek twitched. Jasmine laid the paper flat on the table. On page 2, you affirm, under penalty of perjury, that you and your immediate family received no compensation, gifts, or honoraria from any party with an interest in the litigation. A reporter's pen slipped from their fingers and clattered to the tile. Jasmine didn't flinch. Yet, she continued, pulling a second document free, this record, obtained through a lawful FOIA request, shows that just 6 months before the ruling, you were a guest speaker at a private retreat sponsored by the Charterman Foundation. Stone finally shifted, straightening in his chair as though posture alone could restore control. You are mischaracterizing. No, Jasmine said, voice crisp, slicing clean through his protest. This is a receipt. She held it up. $18,500 in speaking fees. A sharp exhale rippled through the room, the collective sound of disbelief and dread. And before you suggest this was an innocent oversight, Jasmine went on, sliding the paper forward, I have a copy of the invitation itself. She placed it gently on the stack. Your Honor, she said, her eyes never wavering, the invitation lists you as a trusted partner in our policy objectives. A beat of silence. Then another. Stone's fingers curled over the edge of the bench. You are out of order, he said, but the words lacked conviction. Jasmine stepped closer, voice lowering but somehow gaining force. No, Judge, she replied. What's out of order is a court that tells working families their cases are meritless, while its own decisions are shaped behind closed doors by private money. The gallery was utterly still. Not a shuffle. Not a cough. Just the unstoppable clarity of the moment. Jasmine rested both hands on the table. Today isn't about political theater, she said, her voice softer now, almost intimate. It's about reminding every person watching that justice isn't supposed to be for sale. And in that second, before the bailiff dared to move, before the gavel could strike, she looked Judge Stone dead in the eye. You want this record to reflect something, Judge? Her tone dropped to a whisper that somehow carried to the last row. Let it reflect this, when the truth shows up, it doesn't knock. It just walks in. For a full 5 seconds, no one dared to speak. Then the gavel slammed down. Once, twice, 3 times, echoing like a gunshot against the marble walls. Order! Judge Stone barked, though the tightness in his throat betrayed him. Jasmine didn't even blink. He leaned forward, gripping the edge of the bench like it might keep him from sliding into the truth she'd just unleashed. You have no standing here, he said, his voice trembling on the edges of control. This is a judicial proceeding, not a political circus. She tilted her head, studying him the way a surgeon studies a wound. And yet, Jasmine replied quietly, here you are, dressed in a robe, pretending you don't owe explanations to the public you claim to serve. The words landed with a heaviness that made the air feel twice as thick. A young woman in the press section, barely old enough to rent a car, lifted her phone to record. Her hands were shaking. Stone swallowed. If you have evidence, he said, attempting a veneer of authority, submit it properly. Otherwise, you will be removed. Jasmine didn't budge. Removed by whom? She asked, her voice low but steady. You can have me escorted out, Judge. But you can't unring this bell. And she tapped the stack of documents with her finger. These records are already public. By tomorrow morning, every major outlet will have copies. You can clear the gallery if it makes you feel powerful. But the truth doesn't stay locked in chambers. His jaw clenched, eyes flicking to the bailiff. But even the bailiff looked uncertain now, caught between duty and conscience. This is contempt of court, Stone warned, though his voice cracked on the last word. Jasmine drew a slow breath. No, Your Honor, she said. This is contempt for corruption. A collective shiver moved through the crowd. It wasn't just the accusation, it was the calm precision with which she delivered it, as though she'd been preparing for this showdown her entire life. Jasmine stepped closer to the table, her gaze never wavering. I didn't come here to humiliate you, she said, softer now, her voice carrying only because no one dared to fill the silence. I came here because every time you hide behind procedure, a working mother in my district loses her last hope of being heard. Every time you pretend neutrality while cashing a check, a small business owner gets crushed by a system rigged against them. A tear slipped down the cheek of a woman in the front row, unnoticed by Stone but not by Jasmine. And every time you tell yourself this is just how the game is played, Jasmine continued, you teach a generation to stop believing in the law altogether. Stone pressed his lips into a thin, colorless line. You have made your point, he rasped. But Jasmine smiled, just barely. No, she said. My point isn't made until people understand this isn't about me. Or you. Or any one decision. Her eyes swept the room, catching every pair of watching eyes. This is about what happens when justice becomes a costume people wear to hide their ambition. And for the first time, Judge Andrew H. Stone didn't look like an icon of impartiality. He looked like a man cornered by the truth. The gallery felt like it might erupt. Somewhere near the back, a reporter mouthed the words "she's ending him" to a colleague, but no one dared speak aloud. Jasmine rested her palm flat over the evidence, grounding herself. Judge Stone's hand hovered near the gavel, like he could hammer reality back into submission if he struck it hard enough. But the problem with the truth was that it didn't care who held the gavel. "You want to call this contempt?" Jasmine said quietly. "Fine. Call it what you like. But you don't get to rename what everyone here is watching with their own eyes." She picked up the invitation again, the one with his name in embossed print, "A trusted partner." She turned it toward the crowd. "Here," she said, voice unshaken, "is the problem in plain English. The same man who ruled that a single mother's housing claim was unfounded was the guest of honor at a retreat funded by the developers she was fighting." Stone didn't deny it. He didn't even look at her. Because there was nowhere left to look that didn't incriminate him. Jasmine's voice dipped even lower, the hush of it somehow more devastating than any shouted accusation. "Justice is supposed to be blind," she said. "But you've spent years helping it keep one eye open, just enough to see who's writing the checks." A collective shudder passed through the room, like the truth itself had cracked something in the air. And then, finally, Stone spoke. "You are dangerously close," he said, voice ragged, "to defaming this court." She studied him, the corner of her mouth curving into something that wasn't quite a smile. "No," she answered. "What's dangerous is pretending this is normal." He shifted, but the power was slipping through his hands like sand. Jasmine held up a final paper, one nobody had expected her to find. A handwritten note on personal stationery, signed in his looping script. "Thank you for your ongoing commitment to our shared goals." She set it down with a softness that made it land heavier than any slam. "You called it gratitude," she said, her voice clear enough to carry to the last row. "I call it a receipt." Stone swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing once. He tried to speak, tried to find the voice that had once commanded entire chambers, but nothing came out. Jasmine let the silence do what no argument ever could, she let it reveal him. And in that hush, every person in the gallery understood something they'd never forget. Power wasn't in the title. It was in the willingness to stand up and say enough. She took a slow step back, never breaking eye contact. And in the stillness that followed, it was clear Judge Stone had lost something he could never reclaim. Not his seat. Not his reputation. But the illusion that his authority made him untouchable. No one dared to breathe. Jasmine took another step back, letting the echo of her last words settle into every corner of the courtroom. A woman in the gallery reached for her phone, her hand trembling so badly she almost dropped it. She wasn't alone. Half the room was trying to process what they just witnessed, the quiet dismantling of a man who had hidden behind his robe for decades. Stone finally lifted his gaze. His eyes, which had once held the polished confidence of a man certain of his pedestal, were flat and small now. "Congresswoman," he rasped, "you think you can walk in here and undermine public trust in this institution?" Jasmine didn't look away. "No," she said softly. "You did that." Her words weren't loud. They didn't have to be. "You did it every time you ruled against a family that couldn't afford to donate to a campaign," she went on, her voice gathering force. "You did it every time you pretended that fairness could coexist with favoritism." Someone in the back whispered, "She's right," and the sound felt like a stone dropped into still water. Jasmine set her hand on the stack of papers. "I'm not here because I enjoy this," she said. "I'm here because people in my district still believe in the law, even when it fails them." Stone's jaw flexed. "Order," he croaked, but it was too late. Order had already left the room. "You think you can scare me with that gavel?" she asked, her voice a notch lower, intimate and razor-sharp all at once. "I've stood in courtrooms where judges called poverty a personal failing. Where they told mothers that losing their homes was just unfortunate timing. Where they pretended children didn't notice their parents breaking under the weight of your decisions." Her hand trembled, just slightly, and she set it flat on the table to steady it. "My mother worked 2 jobs so we could stay in an apartment that leaked when it rained," she continued, her voice threading between control and memory. "I watched her mop up water at midnight, and I learned something you never did: dignity doesn't come from a title. It comes from never lying to yourself about who you serve." A hush fell so deep you could almost hear the heartbeat of the room. She drew a breath, and when she spoke again, it was quiet. "You don't have to like me," Jasmine said. "You don't even have to respect me." She leaned forward, her eyes locked to his. "But you will hear me." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. And in that moment, it felt like the whole country was watching, not just the people in the courtroom, not just the reporters in the gallery, but every person who had ever been dismissed as too small to matter. Stone didn't answer. Because there was nothing left to say. In the silence, Jasmine slowly gathered the papers into a single neat stack. Every eye in the gallery followed her hand, like watching the final move in a chess game nobody thought she could win. Judge Stone tried to regain his composure. He adjusted his robe, squared his shoulders, and lifted his chin. But it was all theater now. Everyone could see it. "Congresswoman Crockett," he said finally, voice scraping against the dryness in his throat, "you have made serious accusations in a public forum. Do you understand the gravity of that?" Jasmine lifted her gaze, her eyes clear and steady. "Do you understand the gravity of the choices you made?" Her tone didn't waver. Stone swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing once. This court," Jasmine cut in gently, "doesn't belong to you." Her words landed like a hammer wrapped in velvet. "It belongs to the people who believed your oath meant something." Someone near the gallery door stifled a gasp. Another person whispered, "She's not stopping." And she wasn't. Because there was more to say. "You talk about decorum," she continued, her voice dropping into something close to sadness. "But what you call decorum is just a shield for your comfort." Stone blinked. "You want me to be quiet," she said, her tone so calm it almost sounded tender. "You want me to respect the protocols of a system you have already broken." Stone's hands tightened on the bench, the knuckles bone white. "This is not appropriate," he rasped. Jasmine stepped closer, her palms braced against the table. "What's not appropriate," she replied softly, "is telling single mothers they have no case while you take favors from the very people evicting them." Her words hung in the air, too heavy to ignore. "And let me be clear," she went on, voice rising by a single, controlled notch, "this isn't about left or right." She gestured around the courtroom, her eyes sweeping across every person watching. "It's about whether you can look in the mirror tomorrow and still pretend you stand for justice." The quiet in the gallery grew almost painful. Jasmine closed her folder, sliding it into her bag. But before she stepped away, she looked back at Stone one final time. "Do you remember what you wrote in your confirmation hearing?" she asked. Stone didn't answer. She didn't expect him to. "You said the law should never be a weapon for the powerful," she reminded him. "That it should be a shield for the vulnerable." Her eyes didn't blink. "You stopped believing that a long time ago." She paused, letting that truth settle into every watching mind. "But some of us never did." It was the softest line she had spoken all day, and somehow it was the one that hit the hardest. Judge Stone looked down at his hands, as though he couldn't quite bear to meet her eyes. And in that second, everyone in the room understood. This wasn't the day Jasmine Crockett lost her composure. It was the day Judge Stone lost his mask. Someone in the gallery finally exhaled, a shaky, audible release of breath that felt like it belonged to everyone. Jasmine adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder. She didn't rush. She didn't need to. Because every person in that courtroom could feel it, the moment had already shifted. "This isn't about me," she said quietly, her eyes sweeping over the crowd. "It's about every person who sat where I'm standing now, too afraid to speak because they knew the cost." Stone tried to summon the authority that had carried him through decades of hearings and rulings, but it slipped through his grasp like water. "You are overstepping," he rasped, voice low. Jasmine didn't look away. "No," she said. "I'm stepping exactly where I'm supposed to be, between your comfort and the truth." Her words had the weight of something final. She turned to the gallery then, letting her gaze land on the young woman who'd been recording, on the older man in a faded work jacket, on the law students in the back row scribbling notes with wide eyes. "Some of you will call this disrespect," Jasmine continued. "And that's fine." She paused, letting the silence thicken. "Because I'm not here to earn his respect," she said, her voice gathering force. "I'm here to prove that the people he failed still matter." Stone's jaw tightened. "You're grandstanding," he spat. Jasmine's eyebrows lifted just a fraction. "Do you really think this is about performance?" she asked, softer now. "Performance is pretending to be impartial while you dine with the same lobbyists who bankroll your rulings." Her hand rested on the folder at her hip. "Performance," she continued, "is acting like transparency is an inconvenience instead of a requirement." Stone's face flushed a mottled red. And Jasmine, she didn't look angry. She looked heartbreakingly clear. "Do you know what the worst part is?" she asked him. He didn't answer. She didn't wait. "It's not that you failed," she said. "It's that you convinced yourself it wasn't a failure." A low murmur passed through the crowd, the sound of 100 people realizing they'd never see this place the same way again. And still, Jasmine wasn't finished. "When I was a public defender," she continued, voice carrying steady and sure, "I sat across from clients who knew they'd already lost before the trial ever started." Her throat tightened, but she didn't let it stop her. "They'd look at me and ask if there was even a point in fighting. If any of this could be fair." She looked Stone dead in the eye. "Your Honor," she said, her voice low, "you were the reason some of them stopped believing." Stone looked away. The gallery felt like it was holding one collective breath, waiting for the next line to fall. "And if that makes you uncomfortable," Jasmine went on, her voice firm but never cruel, "good." She paused just long enough to let the silence wrap around them. "It means you still have enough conscience left to feel it." She didn't flinch. And Judge Stone didn't deny her. Because for the first time in years, he couldn't. No one in the gallery dared to move. The air felt like it was vibrating, charged by something deeper than outrage, something closer to reckoning. Jasmine didn't drop her gaze. She wanted him to look her in the eye when she said this next part. "When you first put on that robe," she began, voice almost gentle, "I'm sure you believed you were serving justice." Stone's lip twitched. He didn't interrupt. "But somewhere along the way," she continued, "you stopped serving the people and started serving yourself." The words weren't shouted. They were spoken so quietly they forced everyone to lean in, to listen harder. "And now," Jasmine said, "you're not just a man who failed." Her tone hardened, every syllable a clean strike. "You're a symbol of why so many have stopped trusting this system at all." Stone opened his mouth, but she cut him off with a single lifted hand. "This isn't your moment to explain," she said, and the hush in her voice was more commanding than any gavel. "This is your moment to listen." Her fingers pressed lightly on the folder again, feeling the weight of every affidavit, every receipt, every name. "Because I didn't come here for spectacle," she said. "I came here to remind you, and everyone watching, that justice is not yours to define alone." Her voice was calm, but her eyes burned. You don't get to tell a mother working 3 jobs that her kids don't deserve a safe place to sleep because she missed a filing deadline. She took a step closer to the bench. You don't get to call it order when it's really just oppression in a prettier suit. Stone's face drained of color. Somewhere in the gallery, a reporter whispered, "Oh my God," but Jasmine didn't break her focus. "I am standing here," she said, her tone lifting just enough to fill the chamber, because somebody has to say what too many are too scared to admit. She drew a single breath. That this system protects itself. Another step forward. That it makes excuses for the powerful and punishes the vulnerable. Her hand dropped to her side. And that as long as I have this platform, this voice, I won't stop exposing that. The hush wasn't silence anymore. It was something heavier, something that felt like history being made. Stone's mouth worked, searching for a reply, but none came. Jasmine nodded once, as if satisfied that she had said exactly what needed saying. "You can call this disrespect," she finished. "You can call it radical. You can call it inconvenient." Her shoulders lifted, her chin rising just enough to meet every eye in the room. "But you will never again call it untrue. And for a heartbeat, just one." The weight of every unchecked injustice in that chamber hung between them, undeniable and absolute. For a moment, no one in the chamber remembered to breathe. Jasmine's words hovered in the air like something alive, a presence that refused to be swallowed or softened. Stone's gavel rested near his hand, but he didn't reach for it. He looked like he wanted to, like he needed the security of a ritual he still controlled, but even he understood how empty that gesture would seem now. Jasmine didn't move to fill the quiet. She knew the most powerful truths didn't need an echo. Slowly, she turned to face the gallery. Her eyes scanned the rows of spectators, some with phones raised, some with hands clasped tight over their mouths, some just blinking hard to hold back the sting behind their eyes. And then she said something nobody expected. "I'm not here to convince you I'm right," she began. Her voice was softer now, so clear you could hear the slight catch in her breath. "I'm here to ask you to remember who you are." Stone blinked, confusion flickering in his gaze. Jasmine looked back at him, her expression unflinching. "When you started this career," she said, "you probably told yourself you'd be different." Her tone wasn't mocking. It was almost sad. "That you'd be the judge who saw every person who walked through that door." She rested her palm on the table in front of her. "But somewhere along the way," she continued, "you decided your comfort mattered more than your conscience." A rustle passed through the crowd, the sound of realization sinking in. "You decided to confuse compliance with justice," Jasmine said. "And you called that wisdom." Stone's throat worked, but no sound came out. Jasmine let the moment breathe. "My constituents don't expect perfection," she said, her voice growing stronger with every word. "They expect honesty." Her gaze swept the spectators again. "They expect someone to admit when the system is rigged." And then she turned fully back to Stone. "And when I walk out that door, Judge Stone," she said quietly, "I'll still be accountable to them." She tilted her head, studying him like she was seeing him clearly for the first time. "Who are you accountable to?" The question landed with the force of something too sharp to avoid. The gallery was silent. Stone tried to gather himself, pressing his hands against the bench. But Jasmine didn't give him the out he was looking for. "Because if the answer is no one," she said, "then you are not a judge." She took a single step back, her face calm but resolute. "You are just another man who mistook power for purpose." And with that, Jasmine Crockett closed her folder. It wasn't a surrender. It was a declaration. A hush so complete fell over the chamber that you could almost hear the heartbeat of every person watching. In that moment, no one cared about titles. They cared about the truth. And Jasmine had given them more of it than they ever expected to hear. The quiet held for several long seconds. Not the respectful hush of a courtroom awaiting a ruling, something heavier. Something closer to grief for what had been lost, and awe for what had just been reclaimed. Jasmine didn't look away. Judge Stone lifted his chin, fighting for any scrap of composure he could still summon. But the performance was over. All that remained was truth. "Congresswoman," he began, his voice rough, "you have made your point." Jasmine let out a slow, measured breath. "No," she said gently. "I didn't come here to make a point." Her eyes found his, unwavering. "I came here to make it impossible to look away." A ripple passed through the gallery, like an invisible tide shifting everyone a fraction forward in their seats. And then she turned to the rows of spectators. "You don't need a title to hold power," she said, her voice low but carrying to the farthest wall. "You only need the courage to name what you see." A young woman near the aisle lifted her phone to record. Jasmine didn't mind. She wanted this part to be remembered. "For too long," she continued, "people like him have counted on our silence." She nodded at Stone, who sat rigid and pale. "They counted on us feeling too small, too tired, too outnumbered to speak up." Her hand rested on the folder one final time. "But the truth is, there are more of us than there are of them." Someone in the back let out a single, choked laugh, more relief than amusement. "And if you hear nothing else I said today," Jasmine went on, "hear this." She took a breath, steadying herself. "Justice isn't a ritual you perform in this building." She looked directly at Stone. "It's a responsibility you carry every single day." The judge's gaze dropped to the bench. Jasmine's voice softened. "You forgot that," she said. "And you taught the rest of us how dangerous it is when power forgets why it exists." No one interrupted. No one tried to stop her. Because everyone in that room, supporters, critics, staffers, understood they were witnessing the kind of moment that becomes legend. Jasmine took one step back. "You will write your opinions," she said calmly, "and I will write mine." Her eyes lifted to the gallery again. "But out there," she added, voice rising, "there are millions of people who don't need a robe or a gavel to know what's right." And then she said the line that would be replayed 1,000 times that night. "This system isn't broken because it fails sometimes. It's broken because it protects the people who fail it on purpose." A collective exhale rose, like an entire room finally allowed to breathe. Judge Stone didn't respond. He couldn't. Jasmine turned, her bag in hand, and walked steadily down the aisle. She didn't look back. She didn't have to. Because the moment she stepped through those heavy wooden doors, it was clear to everyone. No matter what Stone ruled, he had already lost something he could never reclaim. The illusion that no one would ever dare to confront him. And Jasmine Crockett had done more than confront him. She had made the truth undeniable. And if you stayed through every word, if you felt that chill in your chest when Jasmine Crockett refused to bow, then you already understand why this moment matters. Because this wasn't just a hearing. It wasn't just a clash between one woman and one judge. It was a reminder. That power without conscience is nothing. That titles mean less than truth. And that sometimes, all it takes to crack the walls of a system is for one voice to refuse to be quiet. Jasmine didn't need to scream. She didn't need to threaten. She didn't need to perform. She stood her ground with the strength of someone who knows exactly who she is, and exactly who she's fighting for. And if watching her made you think about all the times you stayed silent, all the times you felt small, all the times you believed the lie that you didn't matter, remember this. Courage doesn't start loud. It starts in the quiet moments when you decide you've had enough. Enough excuses. Enough pretending. Enough injustice dressed up as respectability. Today, Jasmine showed what happens when someone finally says, "No more." And maybe, just maybe, that's the beginning of something bigger than any courtroom.